Welcome to District Deep Dive, where we take a look at the history, culture, and political climate of each of Panem's 13 districts. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at District 12, the smallest and poorest district in Panem and home to our beloved heroine Katniss Everdeen. District 12 is located in what is modern-day Appalachia, consisting primarily of West Virginia and Kentucky. However, due to the fact the entirety of District 12's population can be comfortably situated within a single village, the population sitting just shy of 8,000 prior to the Third Quarter Quell bombings, the overwhelming majority of this land is likely uninhabitable. Yet despite its small size, we receive extensive information regarding the layout of this one village and the politics associated with that layout. So without further ado, let's dive in. While Panem is supposed to theoretically take place in a post-racial world, District 12 appears to have a heavily race-based class divide, with the majority of its inhabitants falling into one of two social classes: the fair-skinned, blonde, and blue-eyed merchants versus the olive-skinned, dark-haired, gray-eyed members of the seam. Due to the ambiguity of this description, there are numerous fans that speculate the members of the seam were specifically written to reference the Melungeon people of Appalachia, a triracial ethnic group primarily thought to be descended from white settlers, freed people of color, and the area's local indigenous peoples. Many view this description as one specifically paying homage to Appalachia's complex racial and cultural history. And personally, on account of the distinction that's made between this group and the merchant class, I find it to be highly probable. The Covey are also yet another distinct ethnic group that inhabit 12, and yet, given the fact the Covey themselves do not identify as members of 12, I struggle to find it fitting to make this be the video where their history is most heavily expanded upon. Initially trapped in 12 due to the events of the First Rebellion, this nomadic people have been reduced to a mere 6 children by the time that Panem reaches the events of the 10th Games. And yet despite their meager numbers, the songs the Covey carry and pass along grow to make up a central aspect of District 12's culture. Folk songs are used to provide comfort, affirm bonds, and provide crucial pieces of 12's history that wouldn't otherwise have been learned. And despite the Covey being scattered by the time Katniss matures, their legacy still lies and is present in their songs. While the merchant and seam classes freely mix together, they do appear to avoid intermarriage, as upwards class mobility is virtually impossible to achieve. Should a member of the merchant district fall in love with and decide to marry a member of the seam, they will be the ones that have to move to the seam. The reverse scenario of a member of the seam being able to easily transition into the merchant district being seemingly impossible, as we see with Katniss's mother and father, with her mother having to forsake her former class to marry Mr. Everdeen. This particular divide shapes a significant amount of day-to-day life within District 12, impacting everything from the physical layout of the district to the tensions that influence its inhabitants. It's further worth noting that a significant reason as to why class mobility is seemingly impossible within 12 is because the housing is government assigned. Although this aspect of life is only briefly touched on, Katniss discusses it when describing wedding rituals within 12. The weddings are described as being remarkably simple affairs, in which the core focus is the couple and community over extravagant displays of material wealth. The women rent a communal white dress, and the men change into whatever spare clothing they can cobble together. And if possible, indulge in a meal with their family and friends after signing the marriage decrees. But if not, the reception will still sing a traditional song to welcome the new couple to their household, at whatever location the local government has deemed to be appropriately befitting. Although this may seem markedly somber, this is still a joyous accomplishment in the eyes of the district residents, and the newlywed couples celebrate appropriately by toasting a piece of bread, still finding some form of joy in the wake of this powerlessness. The seam lies on the outskirts of District 12, lying adjacent to the woods that Katniss relies on to feed and financially support her family. It's described as being a place whose squat gray houses are almost perpetually coated with a fine layer of coal dust, with its inhabitants being among Panem's most heavily impoverished. Members of the seam typically have to navigate their lives under the threat of constant loss, typically having to choose between starvation and the ever-present threat of a mining accident, many having lost members of their family to both. Katniss herself states that starvation is far off from an uncommon fate, with it seemingly being an ordinary, everyday occurrence to see a person that has totally collapsed under the strain of it. Resultantly, the majority of civilians presumably rely on tesserae to ensure their day-to-day survival, having to make flat, dense loaves to make their meager year-long supply stretch. Seam residents' everyday lives further revolve around various aspects of coal mining and production, with even the name the seam being given in reference to the coal seams the residents mine. However, the seam notably lacks the futuristic technologies we see scattered throughout Panem, having to rely on borderline archaic methods to scrape by. Their sector is only supplied a few hours of electricity a day, meaning the majority have to rely on candles for light. But even more concerningly, the miners have been provided no safety tools to ensure they leave the caverns alive, with them having to rely on caged canaries to determine whether or not the gases have reached toxic levels. However, despite their poverty, District 12 children attend public school, and are in fact among the only districts in Panem where the children are allowed to complete their schooling. The majority of the other districts are no stranger to child labor. Rue aids in District 11's harvests at 12. The children of District 8 have to work mandatory shifts in sweatshops after school. The children of District 10 work jobs that could be considered every bit as dangerous as coal mining, with them butchering livestock from the time they're children. And yet, there's no hard legislature in place to prevent them from working. So what makes District 12 children the unique exception? We do have a handful of potential explanations, the first being that District 12 is the smallest in Panem, and as such has the least amount of children. Of all the industries that are scattered throughout Panem, although many are dangerous in their own right, coal mining has uniquely high casualty rates associated with it. And even in the event that some children were to survive, they would be virtually guaranteed to develop extremely adverse health effects as they aged. Although coal is not anywhere near as valuable an export as that of the other districts, the capital still needs District 12 to maintain its meager population. But in preventing children from working, the capital ensures the only power the children of the district have to feed their starving families is through taking out tesserae, drastically increasing the odds the tribute that is reaped will have little to no chance of winning. Limiting the pool of children available for reaping also hinders the effect the reapings are intended to have, hence the incentive. Historically, the most efficient means of keeping a population complacent has been to keep them uneducated and uninformed, so to see Panem offer any sort of education whatsoever seems odd. However, closer inspection reveals the educational system in Panem is merely an indoctrination tool and little more. Aside from a few rudimentary math, reading, and history lessons, every day revolves around teaching children to produce their district's given export. And in District 12, this means the majority of the students' school days center around learning the intricacies of coal production. Weekly, they also receive a lecture concerning the history of Panem, which notably doesn't contain any tangible historical facts, but rather a series of statements intended to convey the image the districts are indebted to the capital, likely detailing the district's conditions and quotas as being the natural consequence of their failure to fulfill said debt. While seaman merchant children attend school together, there is likely a considerable amount of tension between the two. Merchant children will never know the hard physical labor District 12's education system aims to prepare residents of the seam for, and merchant children never have to take out tesserae in order to ensure their families live one year to the next, making reaping day a considerably less terrifying ordeal. Gale can hardly mask his contempt for them, despite being conscientious of the fact they're not exactly living in the lap of luxury. And this is a mindset we can assume extends to a number of seamed children. Take into consideration the example of Madge Undersea, the mayor's daughter, who sits only with Katniss at lunch and has a notably difficult time integrating with her peers, likely at least partially due to resentment over her perceived status. And to be totally fair, imagine how infuriating it would be for a member of the seam to watch a merchant child fuss over something petty, when they themselves are from a sector where the simple ability to show obvious signs of aging indicates luxury. However, the merchant class, while better off financially, by no means boasts anything remotely resembling the wealth of the capital or even the wealth of the more financially prosperous districts like 1 and 2. The majority live directly above the stores they staff in the town square, rely on the scraps of whatever they produce to survive, and depend primarily on peacekeepers to make up the bulk of their recurrent customers. And yet, although their wealth is meager, their lives are leaps and bounds better than that of their peers in the seam. Yes, they must live where they work, but their housing is significantly nicer and has electricity. Their pay is poor, but enough to buy the bare essentials. Peeta's family may have to live off of stale bread, but stale bread is better than not having a scrap whatsoever. Yet despite all these advantages, the merchant's position is precarious, and there are numerous members that appear to harbor a keen understanding of this fact, that they are infinitely closer to being members of the seam than they are the capital. Katniss's acquisition of Lady, Prim's pet goat, actually provides a fantastic example of class solidarity within District 12. Originally, Lady is going to be purchased by the District 12 butcher, likely for a discount on account of her having been mauled by a large animal. However, the butcher woman recognizes both the fact that Katniss wants the goat and the fact the goat that is wounded will likely be the only goat she will be able to afford, and so withdraws her offer by stating that it's too damaged to be of any worth selling, providing Katniss a chance to get a bid in and pose a convincing argument as to why the price ought to be lowered. She recognizes the goat will be of infinitely more use to Katniss alive, and prioritizes the long-term success of her family beyond her own short-term profits. It's a sense of community prevalent throughout the overwhelming majority of the district, with there being a general sense one success stipulates others. We can find another example within the Hob, District 12's black market. Although there are general markets, the Hob, residing within an abandoned coal warehouse, allows for the exchange of essential but illegally acquired goods, such as the game that Katniss retrieves from the woods. It's a crucial service, but one whose very existence could evoke massive punishment. And yet, it's an open secret the district manages to maintain for decades. District 12 is also notably among the few spaces that at least attempts to preserve those who cannot preserve themselves. While the contributions the residents of District 12 can make to sustain their most unfortunate members are limited on account of their own deep poverty, the fact they are so often lacking in the materials needed to sustain themselves means whatever meager contributions they do manage to make are all the more meaningful. Although they aren't always necessarily successful, Katniss's struggle following the death of her father being the big example, in the moments they can help provide for their fellow man, the majority will. Take for example Greasy Say's granddaughter, a mentally challenged child everyone generally ensures remains fed, or the promise to protect and provide for Prim in the wake of Katniss's sacrifice. Even in the instances where banding together poses significant personal risk, the district will often find a way of subtly organizing some display of solidarity, the iconic three-finger salute being their symbol of choice to protest the unjustness of Prim's reaping. In the books, Katniss describes the three-finger salute as being an old, rare gesture that is typically only ever spotted at funerals, with it being intended to symbolize admiration, thanks, and goodbye to a person beloved. The first time we see it in the series is when Effie instructs the District 12 citizens to applaud Katniss for volunteering in her sister's place, with Effie still obviously perceiving the games as glorious and honorable, and the act of volunteering even more so. Yet the people of District 12 know better than anyone that rather than commit herself to a noble cause, Katniss has resigned herself to a terrible fate, sacrificing her own life to ensure that her sister could have a healthy, long one. It's this act of sacrifice the district chooses to applaud, and it's a symbol of disapproval that takes on new meaning the moment that Katniss extends it to Rue, with it symbolizing a sense of unity prevailing in an environment specifically designed to destroy it. However, it's worth noting that a significant amount of this is made possible by the reality that Peacekeepers, the militarized police forces that reside within each district, fundamentally don't operate in District 12 the way they do in others. This again has everything to do with 12's size and export. The population consists of a group of under 10,000, all concentrated within a single village, meaning Peacekeepers can keep close tabs on the population with relative ease. Their export is coal when the capital is powered by a hydroelectric dam, and because there is no true need to have coal as a source of heat or power for the capital, so long as they meet their quota, the Peacekeepers can allow them to live relatively untouched lives. Yet the Peacekeepers' own personal needs are what ultimately take precedence when it comes to rationalizing their leniency, with them typically struggling to adjust to the fact that while they may have grown up with unrestricted access to food, they are now stationed in a district that has none, a district so poor that even the wealthy sectors want for basic supplies at times. Resultantly, they are willing to purposely turn blind eyes to activities other Peacekeepers would lash out over, like Katniss and Gil's poaching. It's a district that to the capital is such a non-threat the electric fence that surrounds it is rarely, if ever, turned on. And it's a level of nonchalance that is absolutely integral to ensuring Katniss' survival. This is the reason that Katniss is able to learn to hunt, that she is able to learn to feed her family and survive on her own. Because had she lived in literally any other district with enhanced surveillance, none of these things would have been possible. Yet this level of nonchalance is completely reliant on the complete, perfect compliance of the citizens of 12, and the instant that it's violated, the capital will crack down with the harshness and violence typically only reserved for districts that produce essential goods. Take a look at the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, in which innocent civilians are executed for merely being related to rebel soldiers. While this may seem a standard aspect of warfare, this is an action that becomes particularly sinister with the knowledge the capital has biological databanks that contain the genetic markers of every citizen within 12, meaning they know exactly who commits specific crimes. They simply don't care to exclusively punish the perpetrators. 12's strong sense of solidarity and community means the capital is more likely to impose methods of collective punishment, and there are few better examples of this than their victors. District 12 has 4 canonical victors, each of which uniquely won their games by cheating the system itself. Lucy Gray utilizes a compact of smuggled rat poison to make the majority of her kills. Haymitch Abernathy weaponizes the arena barrier to deflect a thrown axe back into the career that first threw it. Katniss and Peeta fake a suicide attempt. None of these 4 win their games the traditional way, by violently bludgeoning their fellow tributes to death, but rather by carefully turning the tools that their oppressors crafted to ensnare them against them. This is the ultimate unforgivable crime in the eyes of the capital, and historically, each and every one of these victors is met with a punishment so extreme that it negates whatever courage their victory might have briefly instilled within their fellow man. Haymitch's entire family, down to the tiniest child and girlfriend, are publicly executed. Katniss and Peeta's victory is met with martial law being instated within their district, and the people that publicly advocate for them and their loved ones being mutilated and enslaved. Upon smashing the arena barrier and catching fire, Katniss and Peeta are met with the ultimate punishment, the entirety of their district being bombed out of existence. But why? Why bother with implementing such extremes for a district so small, so insignificant, so entirely non-threatening in the grand scheme of things? The rationale the capital expresses in this regard is precisely the reason this tiny district has remained the central focus of 4 books, despite there being other larger, more powerful, and perhaps more entertaining districts to center on. Because if District 12 is allowed to act unchecked, it communicates to every other district that rebellion can be forged in the most powerless of places. If a district so impoverished, so completely bereft of the resources necessary to sustain life, let alone resistance, can resist their superior so-called invincible power, then what message does that realistically communicate to the other districts, who have the power to withhold every resource the capital relies on to operate? While District 12 plays a significant role in the rebellion against the capital during the events of the original Hunger Games trilogy, the history of resistance in this district is long and stretches back to before the events of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Prior to the events of the prequel, although District 12 was not known for large-scale organized resistance, over time, the rebellion in 12 grew in subtle, imperceptible ways due to their oppressive conditions and poverty. The conclusion their district is deliberately overworked and deliberately impoverished is one every miner appears to come to. But anything widespread no longer had a hard presence within 12 until the events of Catching Fire. Even prior to the events of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the games themselves were a powerful tool used by the capital to quell dissent across all districts, including District 12. The games were not only used to instill terror regarding the capital's supreme control and power, but to further remind the districts of the failure and pointlessness of their rebellion. If you shock a dog, and then prevent it from escaping being shocked, it will learn to lie down and quietly accept its pain, even in the event that you lift the barrier. Every aspect of this brutal spectacle is specially chosen to accomplish something similar, to instill within each district the feeling that revolt is pointless. In the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, although we see the system still in its infancy, we already see the capital using the games as a weapon of psychological warfare. Sejanus Plinth, a capital citizen born into a wealthy family from District 2, was deeply empathetic towards the tributes of all districts, not just his own, and rapidly grew increasingly disgusted by the Hunger Games and the capital's use of violence as a tool of control. Ultimately, Sejanus' growing sense of injustice leads him to secretly involve himself in rebellious circles and activities. His growing disgust towards what life in the capital has grown to look like is what ultimately leads him to becoming a peacekeeper, located in District 12 alongside Coriolanus. While living within 12, Sejanus becomes increasingly disturbed by the harsh living conditions of its people, who are constantly subjected to starvation, harsh labor, and a ruthless police regime, and forges a tentative alliance with the tatters of the rebel movement that remain. Sejanus' connection to said rebels is an incredibly powerful demonstration that even before Katniss, there were individuals within the district who were ready and willing to fight back. But unfortunately, due to the swiftness and severity with which the capital brings down its fist upon anyone that dared speak against it, Sejanus' treason forces him and his peers to pay the ultimate price. Yet his sense of moral outrage, particularly on behalf of District 12, makes him a symbolic figure of the earliest acts of resistance we narratively witness. While he may not have sparked an immediate rebellion, his actions are 100% a precursor to the broader rebellion of District 12, and ultimately, all of Panem. His execution, while tragic, also serves to represent the inability of the capital to fully suppress resistance. After the events of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the capital government continues to use poverty and neglect as tools with which they could further control the citizens of their district. Although their peacekeepers and district boundaries are significantly more lax than that of the other districts, this seems to be, more than anything, a product of pervasive collapse, present in everything from their homes to their workplaces. At the point that we reach Katniss' games, district citizens were simply too sick and too exhausted to run away, despite the door being essentially open. The threat of having something happen to their family members as a result of their own actions was more than enough to keep the majority of the citizenry from venturing further than the boundary fence. However, the capital's near constant usage of fear and intimidation tactics had backfired by this point, as conditions eventually reach a threshold where the efforts that were originally intended to keep people divided only bring them closer together through shared hardship. There is only so much the capital reasonably can take from its citizenry before they have nothing left to lose, and a person that has nothing left to lose is one at their most dangerous. The only way the capital ever could squelch any mention of a growing resistance in 12, and to prevent the news from spreading to the rest of the districts, was to keep the district from clinging onto the one thing that wasn't the capital's to take: their hope. The most effective and easiest way to accomplish this was for them to ensure that no tribute from District 12 ever won the games again after Lucy Gray's victory in the 10th. The victory of a tribute in the Hunger Games arena isn't just a symbol of survival. It near inevitably becomes a symbol of strength and pride of the tribute's district. For Districts 1 and 2, who produce frequent, powerful victors, these ones reinforce a sense of superiority. However, because 12 only has 2 victors prior to Katniss and Peeta, these long stretches between victories contribute to this ever-pervasive sense of defeat that permeates the entire district. The citizens of Panem were already seen as subhuman by the capital, but District 12 tributes were subject to further mockery and humiliation by traditionally being viewed as cannon fodder, having little chance at survival outside of the first few minutes of bloodshed. These repeated, viciously rapid slaughters made them feel helpless not only within the context of the games themselves, but in terms of their broader existence under the capital regime. Without a victor to bring prestige and honor to their district, the citizens internalized a belief they were weak, inherently defenseless, and therefore at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Haymitch's victory in the 50th games gives them a small amount of pride, but the barbarity of what he is subjected to after and his subsequent decline renders whatever tepid hope his victory instilled within his peers obsolete. His bitterness towards the capital and the ways in which the capital manipulates his public appearances following his victory turns him into a cruel and public demonstration of the fact the capital could destroy even the strongest of champions. Instead of a beacon, Haymitch's victory is perverted into that of a cautionary tale and serves to deepen the district's sense of resignation. This cycle of repeated defeat and humiliation, coupled with the reality the district must simultaneously remain fully dependent on the capital for what little they could get by with, enforces and reinforces a collective and learned helplessness. 12 citizens know they have no chance at the games themselves, meaning they have no choice but to concentrate the bulk of their energy on survival, further meaning that real, organized rebellion was the last thing on most people's minds. They had no emotional energy left. However, it was this exact sense of helplessness that fueled people like Gale Hawthorne, that birthed a deep and unshakable resentment concerning how the capital used the games to toy with the districts. Gil hated the capital for trapping the citizens of Panem into an endless cycle of exploitation with no way to break free. And his growing hatred for the capital and desire for rebellion is largely fueled by the systemic oppression that has left him and everyone he knows and cares about in a perpetual state of defeat. His anger is a glimpse into the smoldering resentment and rage that was gradually building and bubbling up beneath the surface of 12's most exploited members. While the people may have been too beaten down to organize any sort of large-scale resistance at first, their growing dissatisfaction with the capital's control over their lives, coupled with the hunger and want that had begun to bubble over, warranted but the briefest spark to prompt all-out war. When Katniss volunteered for Prim in the 74th Games and became a victor alongside Peeta, she became the exact symbol of defiance that the capital had spent years trying to stomp out. Not only did her and Peeta's victory reignite the lost sense of hope that her district and country had been longing for, but the simple act of defiance that brought her the victory set fire to the entire nation of Panem, and from the instant that it caught, it was too big a flame for even the capital to extinguish. Katniss was living proof that even the most downtrodden, powerless district could produce a victor who resisted the capital's control. And her rise as a victor pivoted the dynamic of 12. Her victory was more than a matter of mere survival, because without intending to, she created the sense of the possibility that rebellion was no longer just a pipe dream or fantasy, but a potential reality, one that had been rising quietly under the surface, just waiting for permission to show its face and wreak havoc. The capital's retaliatory brutality against her home, like firebombing the Hob and torturing Gale as punishment for poaching a turkey, was too little, too late. After her victory, capital violence only serves to strengthen the resolve of the people. This radical shift meaning that what previously worked as a tool to subdue had turned into a catalyst to foster determination to resist, with Katniss serving as the people's symbol of hope. Prior to Katniss's act of defiance, it was near impossible for the districts to unify against the capital. Their strategy of control was multifaceted, and designed to keep the districts isolated, divided, and distrustful of each other. Further compounded by the fact that the only time they interacted with one another was when preparing for bloodshed. Their economic specialties only foster even further division between them, with citizens being robbed of both identity and interaction, ensuring that the capital was in complete control of the flow of information, that nobody could discern fact from fiction, and that the citizenry were at manufactured odds with each other. As long as nobody could agree who the real enemy was, unification wasn't just impossible, but pointless. And of all the districts, District 12 is the one that is most heavily and negatively impacted by these factors. But part of the beauty of the Hunger Games series is the notion that above all else, hope will always prevail over fear. These factors that kept District 12 isolated, downtrodden, and divided forged the perfect place for revolution and uprising to begin, fostering a unique and combustive combination of resentment, defiance, and symbolic power. Of all the districts, 12 had the least to lose, which in turn made them the most willing to support a resistance that had been in development for years. Katniss Everdeen's rise turns 12 from a weak, inconsequential source of cannon fodder into the ashes that the Girl on Fire rose from. And Katniss, as the Girl on Fire, galvanizes not only 12, but the entire nation. Thank you so much for taking this tour of Panem with us, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And here's an extra special thank you to our Patreons. What we do would not be possible without your support. If you would like to count yourself among them, the link is in the description. And an extra special thank you to the talented Emily Ann, who helped co-write the script. Her socials are also linked below. Thank you so much for your time, and have a fabulous day.